Welcome back to Goodwill Dynamics, everyone. Today we've got Nick and Tyler here, as well as myself, and we're going to be having a conversation on Goodwill. What is it, and how can we express it? What does it look like in expression? So let's dive right in. We've got usually we do Reddit stories on this channel, but I figured we'd just have a sort of conversation this time on the idea of Goodwill and flesh that out and see what we come up with, and you know, make sure you hit the subscribe button if you want more of this, and give us a like if you've enjoyed the video. But without further ado, here we go. So gentlemen, what is Goodwill? How do you each see Goodwill? What does that call to mind when you hear that word?
Well, I have something perhaps a bit odd to say about that, but not really so odd. I think that Goodwill has a lot to do with having goodwill is about having a resilient will, and having, you know, there being a resiliency to the ideas that you believe in and wish to act on, right? So, because what I think Goodwill kind of starts with is, you know, deciding not to prioritize the first thing you want to do, right? Deciding not to prioritize whatever you feel like, and deciding instead to prioritize, you know, let's say your idea of what's best for the whole, right? Or some idea of what is right. And it's, so I would see it as, you know, having the ability to do that, to look past all of the sort of desires or distractions that come your way, and not only having the ability to do that, but then having the ability to identify with that tendency, so that you're pretty much always choosing to look past the short-term things and the things which make you sort of just a separate kind of person that's not really aiming at anything higher, and to focus more on the things that that mean something and that are more important ultimately, and more better serve the collective, something like that.
I think one way to look at it is to just break down the word. And of course, the word is in two words, goo and dwill. So we have to look up good and will. What does good mean? Like, I think in order for us to understand, because with what is portrayed in the media as being good, and what, at least what I think is generally good, are not necessarily the same thing. There are so many things. As of right now, there's the big thing in the media was this, the trial of Kyle Rittenhouse, and what was portrayed in the media was by and large blatantly false from what is reality. And so, you know, there seems to be different kind of ideals of what is good. And, you know, I think we need to kind of get on the same page with that. I don't know specifically, I don't have the best definition of good, but some definitions that I found: to be desired or approved of. Well, that's, you know, pretty subjective. Having the qualities required for a particular role. Possessing or displaying moral virtue. Giving pleasure, enjoyable, satisfying. As a noun, that which is morally right or righteousness. Benefit or advantage to something, or excuse me, benefit or advantage to someone or something. And as an adverb is well. Okay, so I don't, you know, what is good? What is will? And maybe this is kind of a words that aren't necessarily, you know, when you put them together, it's completely different from the words separately. I don't know.
Yeah, to me, I've been contemplating it when I think of goodwill, it has to do with a helpfulness or willingness to help other people. So it's prioritizing that common humanity, I think, and a positive attitude towards other people. So it's putting attention on that which is good and which we have in common, in like the human spirit, let's say, and not prioritizing lesser things or more superficial things like, oh, did you see that guy's pimple, or other things that aren't so important. Like it's less important that that guy has an ugly nose, and it's more important that he just fell over and could use some help, maybe, for example. So yeah, I think part of goodwill is putting attention on the higher, the more important, the more essential, and less attention on the more superficial or the outer things.
Yeah.
Another thing that I saw here, goodwill, friendly, helpful, or cooperative feelings or attitude. So yeah, I think kind of a working together, possibly a feeling of not as much, I think one of you mentioned it, not so much being separate, but being unified and being together is kind of along the lines of a goodwill.
And to what you were saying about false things on the news and stuff, that to put attention on things that can unify people. Like if something's not true, and it's demonstrably not true, not just this person thinks this and that person thinks that, but something that can provably be said to be true, then that can unify people, because we can come together. That I was going to say that the earth is round, but there's some disagreement on that, but more demonstrable scientific things, like when you throw something, it's going to come down unless there's some other force preventing that from happening. So I guess on essential truths, people can come together, and it's sometimes helpful to put attention on those things that we can unify on, and less on the things that there's not unity on. Because I guess when you focus on that and you're able to build bonds with people or develop strong relationships on sort of more essential things, then if you do have to dive into things that are more contentious, there's that underlying unity within that. Like you have a disagreement about some mechanical issue or a political issue with somebody you've been friends with for years, and presumably if you're really good friends with them and you have a strong bond, you're going to give them the benefit of the doubt, and and hopefully you can work it out, instead of just, oh, they disagree with me, we're done, end of the relationship.
Yeah.
But if you don't have anything in common with somebody and they're totally different and you disagree on stuff, it's like, well, why are we even talking? But that inner bridge can I guess lay a groundwork for outer cleavages being overcome and reconciled.
It gets back to resilience to me. I mean, maybe I just like that term, but it seems like it's the same thing with personal motivations, right? You have, like, if you have some really basic positive approach to your life and you have some basic positive goals, those things are very resilient. They help you get through the little things that get in the way of in sort of day-to-day stuff, right? Like things that would normally annoy you and make you kind of like gripe about them all day, you could look past them because you have these motivations, right? And it's sort of the same thing in a way with what you're saying, right? With if you can have a common vision, not of the details, not of necessarily even what is right, but you at least have a sense that you're both pursuing what's right, and that there is something which is better for the whole, let's say, which is good for the whole, and you're both pursuing some version of that, and you can sort of appreciate each other for doing that, then that becomes a resilient relationship in that sense. And so it weathers all the disagreements about particulars and stuff, and you can sort of stick around long enough to see where some of the common good might lie, or long enough to maybe convince each other on a couple things. And so I think that you need, like, goodwill implies that there's some kind of goal, right? It implies that there's some kind of something to will, which is specifically good. And in order for that to happen on some kind of large scale, like, you need to focus on things that are resilient, focus on things that aren't just going to be torn down by these little annoying things, these little annoying differences between people, or people believing something that isn't quite true or something. So that's what I would have to say.
Why, I got a question, why would we focus on goodwill at all? That's kind of, I mean, the purpose of these videos that you are producing, that you two are producing. Why are we trying to get goodwill out there? Are we just trying to increase people's vocabulary and, hey, did you know that goodwill means that? Like, why are we doing it? Why would we do that?
Well, I guess the idea is that goodwill can heal rifts that that no other kind of energy or attitude could. Like, there's been a lot of I guess the word's polarization in the United States, but probably a lot of the world too, in the past several months. So the idea of having goodwill is something where you can reach out to people with and connect with them on. And even if you're totally right on some particular point, then you can present evidence on it. Unfortunately, going to somebody who doesn't already agree with you with that evidence is often not effective at convincing them on it. So it doesn't lead to a way of reconciling. And I guess with two camps that see each other different ways, if you can have an experience where you see the common humanity in each other, even if you have different ideas or listen to different news sources, if you can have that connection that both people are of goodwill, or both people on both sides are of goodwill, you can heal those rifts, at least to some degree, or you can start. And if you see the people are of goodwill, there's some trust there, and there's potential for a relationship there. And I guess ultimately, real positive relationships would have to be based on goodwill. Like, you think of any relationship that you have, whether it's a good relationship with your parents or siblings or extended family, or your wife or husband, or your kids or your friends, they can be a bad relationship, but if they're good, they're ultimately based on some kind of goodwill. Like, the other person cares about you and wants the best for you, generally speaking, and you for them. So yeah, another thing that's said is goodwill is love in action. And if you can take that love and manifest it through some sort of action and demonstrate it, you can overcome differences. So that's one reason I think it's important, and we're doing this work of trying to promote and flesh out the idea of goodwill and bring the energy of goodwill forward more. What thoughts on it do you guys have?
To me, what the benefit of having goodwill is because people, generally speaking, like to be in more comfortable not relationships. People don't like to have acrimony and hate and anger.
Yeah.
At least as an ideal, I would prefer not to have those things.
Yeah.
When you look at people online, maybe people really do like those things because that's what so much is going on. But
well, maybe up to a point, not 24 hours a day, right? If people tune into stuff, it's like people yelling at each other, they're certainly not going to want to get yelled at for the rest of the day themselves.
Yeah, I don't like getting yelled at. I mean, I've started my own podcast and things like that, and I don't like the negative comments. I much rather prefer the positive ones. I think people like that. So as far as why promote goodwill at all? Why do that? Is because that's generally a better place for people to be. There's more stability in communities. There's more of a chance of a long-term survival of the species, basically, is what it comes down to when there's more goodwill between people. Because when there's not, it's things tend to fall apart rather quickly.
Yeah. And I think, I like the points you just made, and I would only say that focusing on the idea of goodwill in a sense is the beginning of goodwill. Maybe it's because goodwill, like I was sort of saying, it has to do with narrowing down like what's the best course of action for the whole, right? It involves sort of having this idea of what is the group, what is the broader group, and how can I conceive of what's best for the broader group, and what really is the right thing that should happen. And so even just by focusing on the idea of goodwill, people maybe can begin to think in that direction if they're sufficiently open to it. And from there's more of a desire. If you do sort of assimilate that concept, right, mentally, then there's more of a genuine desire to have good faith discussion maybe, and to try to actually objectively understand what's good and what works and all that.
So how can we express this thing, goodwill? What does that look like in life, in relationships, in, I don't know, maybe even larger terms like larger groups and nations in the world?
I think it starts with, well, it could start with just giving people the benefit of the doubt. People have a differing opinion on this or that, and we kind of just need to understand people are at a different, not saying that we're super enlightened or anything. At least I am. I don't know about you guys, but no, I'm kidding. People are different consciousness levels, so to speak. There are people who just react emotionally to anything that happens to them. There's pretty much no thought given to it. Then there's people who are a little bit more mental. They use their mental capacities a little bit more than their emotional bodies. Part of having goodwill means starting with yourself, and I think a big part of that is being able to understand how you react to things. If you find yourself, and this may be really, really difficult to do for a lot of people, because we all think that we're logical and we're very, I'm doing this because of that. But when it comes down to it, most people by and large just react. There's no, they think they're using their minds, but they're not. They're just doing whatever they think is they're being told. And so I think a big part of spreading goodwill is to have some introspection and look within and try to figure out, where am I in this goodwill? Am I someone who other people like to be around? Am I the type of person that when someone's in a jam, they call me? Or am I the one who is always reaching out and being really needy with other people? Now, that's not necessarily a perfect barometer of where someone is at, but it's a start.
What do you think, Nick? How can we express goodwill in relationships in the world and life in different ways?
I mean, a lot of it comes down to having the idea of the whole as well as the integrity of the individual, right? So like a community of nations, so like, you don't want to just be a country that's sort of looking around like, okay, where can I get resources? Can I just, hurt these people and take them? But, you want to have a sense of yourself as part of a community, part of an alliance of nations, part of a world of nations, as it were. And at the same time, you know, you want there to be sort of boundaries, boundaries that are respected, so that there's some kind of measure um, of how to treat each other at an individual level, right? There's some kind of uh, like there's no interaction if there aren't individuals, right? So there has to be that as well. And so it strikes me that, you know, at any level, I think that principle would hold, that you want to be able to consider the whole and the part, and, you know, what's best for the whole that maintains the integrity of the part and allows it to still function and to manifest right, let's say right relationship, or, you know, sort of good principles of, you know, proper interaction. You know, it can manifest that precisely because it remains an individual unit, but it acknowledges itself to be part of a whole.
Yeah, I think putting attention on the sort of divinity within the other person is one of the main ways you can be of goodwill. Like it's more of an attitude, let's say, that might not always seem to be apparent in one's actions. But if you have that attitude of seeing what's best for, you know, the human spirit, then your actions, I mean, it might be the same thing. Like, hey, you know, you put a hole in my tire, so I'm going to need, you know, the money for that. Saying that to somebody. I don't think Goodwill would be like, oh, don't worry about it. It's fine that you know, put a hole in my tire. But if you come into that conversation or even a confrontation or a contentious thing with the attitude of wanting to be open to hearing what they say or listening to what they think, and that they have some important thing to tell you potentially, then the energy of it changes. You know, if you bring the energy of I'm right and you need to accept what I'm saying, it you know, it might go okay, but it might not. And even if they wind up, you know, paying for your tire in this example, they still might come away with bad feelings. And just having that attitude or that energy and being with it can manifest in your speech and your actions in ways that might not seem obvious. Sort of like the power of thought and intention, I guess.
Yeah.
This is kind of like, I don't remember if you explicitly said it, but looking at the Christ within someone else.
Yeah.
There's this idea that, you know, we're imperfect beings, but we're trying to be better. And everyone has a lot of baggage. And if we truly understood all of the crap that people have been through, we would be able to understand them on a much different level. And once we're able to look at it through that, we don't have to necessarily understand or know the background of everyone, but just understanding that most likely the reason that people are the way they are is because of what they've gone through. And you know, the way that they were raised, they may have had great parents, they may have had terrible parents, they may have been abused as a child, or they may have not, or, you know, whatever the case may be. Once we're able to just recognize that people are people because of things that many times are outside of their control, then we're able to come to a different kind of understanding with that person and go, okay, well, I just got yelled at from so-and-so at work. You know, maybe they're having something going on at home. You know, this probably wasn't something personal to me. It was probably something going on, you know, elsewhere. Maybe they just lost a friend. Maybe they're having some financial difficulties, you know, whatever the case may be. But I think once we're able to just understand that people go through crap and, you know, just understand that, I think that's one of also the first steps to coming to, first of all, understand goodwill and to not, and also express it.
Yeah, most people aren't deliberately deciding to, you know, do the wrong thing and hurt people just cause. A lot, like you say, a lot of people aren't looking at it the way that it's coming across, and you know, they have all their problems and stuff. So that's, yeah, that's a pretty important point of being able to see, you know, somebody else's humanity, or as you say, the Christ within them.
Well, it's obviously goodwill is about deciding what's best, and we all kind of have this grand argument going on about what's best, and that's a certain level of it too, right? Like people are accustomed to looking at their life and the world a certain way. They have certain beliefs that make them, you know, less aware of what they're doing to other people, or make them sort of lash out, right? So addressing that is part of goodwill too. Saying, okay, this person might be acting wrong, but you know, instead of focusing on why they're bad, I could also focus on why do they have the wrong idea, and how, you know, what's my idea, what's the alternative.
So do we need to have goodwill before we can have kind of a stable environment, or do we need a stable environment in order to have goodwill? Or is that question just totally off base?
Well, I think, yeah.
I think there needs to be some goodwill to be able to forge a stable environment. I think advances in human living and civilization have largely come from a sense of goodwill, or looking out for the whole. But I think they sort of go hand in hand too. You know, like if, you know, see like on The Walking Dead, not necessarily the zombie part, but the fact that like everything's collapsed and people are fighting over resources, it's a lot harder to have goodwill for people than it is when you're taken care of and you have shelter and you have a stable income and stuff like that. So, I mean, it's almost like a ladder. Like you have to have a little bit of this, which leads to that, which allows for more of this. And, you know, it's sort of a stepping stone thing.
I think a good place to start is also just having a little bit of personal autonomy and freedom, because when you're able to act in your own interest, there's kind of this tug between being a community and doing your own thing. Well, they kind of work together. If you're able to do your own thing, typically you're trying to, at least if you're a business owner, you're trying to put something forward that other people want, and then they will want it in return. And it's when you're able to act in your own interest, and without coercion and without kind of outside influence, largely, I think that builds a better place for the ability of people to have goodwill. Because if those things are taken away from you, then if you're not able to act in your own self-interest, then people actually ironically get more greedy, and they tend to go inward even further. And so instead of working for the whole and being a little bit more community oriented, if you're not able to do that, people tend to get more selfish, which is kind of a weird thing to view.
Well, it's like suppression. Like if you suppress your negative emotions, they build up and then they flare up. But if you're able to just sort of release them, it's you're able to let go of them and they don't build up. And so like the same thing with people, like if they're not free, like if you can never get this thing and then you really want it and you get so fixated on it, for instance. And so your suppression doesn't lead to less of a thing, it leads to more of it. Like with prohibition in the US the last century of alcohol. What happened? People didn't just decide, well, you know, okay, we're done with alcohol. They turned to, you know, criminal activity, and that led to the rise of organized crime. And so, it didn't get rid of alcohol. It caused another problem.
Well,
And that leads to this sort of idea of leaving other people free. Like if you're like trying to set somebody straight, it's one thing to give them a suggestion or say, hey, I've noticed this about you or about something. And then leave them free to, follow up on it or have a conversation. But if you're constantly bringing up and be like, you have to change, then it's sort of not leaving them free to figure it out and go where they need to go and on their own.
This is kind of another one of those ironies, at least that I'm trying to figure out, and I may be analyzing this wrong. You have the communists on one hand; they seem to be intent on destroying civilization. I don't know; I may be overstating that, but they seem to be intent on destroying a lot of institutions and things that provide a lot of stability in the world. They seem to be intent on taking down religion and the family and individualism and all these types of things. And once you do that, it makes things way worse, because then you look at people trying to build a community. To me, the best ways to do that are through a stable family, not always through religion, but at least community groups and things like that. People where people are looking beyond themselves, and the communists, they want to just remove all of that and take away all of the kind of the incentive and put us on a level playing field. And to me, that seems to be the opposite of what you'd want to do if you really want to bring people out of this and out of poverty and out of bad situations. It all comes down to freedom to me, being able to act for yourself and work to better yourself. And typically when you do that, it's not selfish to want to, in my opinion, to be better and to have a better situation. And people don't agree with that. That's where I get back to what the definition of good is, because you have people saying that the free market is bad because now you have some people being taken advantage of or whatever. There are all these things about the free market that people don't like, but it's basically just people freely interacting. And maybe there is a better system than that, but so far we haven't come upon it.
So let me ask you this. Let's say you ran into, this is kind of a bizarre example, but you ran into a communist who believed the way you sort of outlined generally. How would you approach them with goodwill? How would you interact with them? Could you?
Could I? It depends on how radical they were, maybe. There are some who just are not willing to look at anything that strays outside of their mental model. I probably wouldn't really try to approach anyone like that. There are a lot of people who call themselves communists, and they've just been, they went through college, they go they go through college, and then all of a sudden they're radicalized, and a lot of times it just takes a few pointed questions that really pierce the hole in their worldview that brings them back at least away from the hot stove, so to speak. I don't know. Again, you try to understand, where they're coming from, what their situation was, if they lived in a communist country, they probably are not communists now if they've come away from it, because it typically doesn't go well. But I don't know.
I'll give you an example using Nazis. So this was a video Benjamin Boyce did a while ago, where he's talking to this guy from Germany, and this guy was gay. And at one point in the video, he talks about how he's on the train and he meets, I think it was like more than one person at different times who were Nazis, you know, neo-Nazis. This wasn't in World War II. This was like, you know, a few years ago. And he didn't go like, you know, you're bad and this is destroying society and this sort of thing. But he talked with them and he listened to what they had to say. And he was, you know, I don't know if nice is the right word, but, you know, he was respectful of them and having a conversation and behaving decently. And, you know, whereas most people would instantly condemn them because, you know, Nazism is not a good thing. But he listened to what they had to say and he talked with them. And he's like, well, I'm gay, so, you know, I guess I wouldn't be allowed in the society after this. And they're like, no, you're not gay. Yeah, no, that can't be right. And just by him being sort of a decent person, they had an idea that, oh, maybe some of their ideas weren't right. But, you know, he didn't go in with like statistics and, you know, that this plan or that plan doesn't work. Because a lot of people don't get convinced initially by statistics, they get convinced by emotional things. And so if you can speak to that shared humanity, it can break that down. Another example was the Westboro Baptist Church. There was this one woman, one of the daughters who was part of that, and she was in this, you know, thing. For those who don't know, the Westboro Baptist Church is like, they go around protesting funerals and have all sorts of mean things to say to people. But she was online and all these people were like, you're bad, you know, you're terrible, how dare you do this to soldiers and gays and all that sort of stuff. But there was this one guy who online was talking to her and was like, you know, why are you like this? Or, you know, tried to understand her. And he wasn't shouting vitriol. And, you know, it allowed her to see things in a different way. And I think she eventually left the Westboro Baptist Church and married that guy. But all the people shouting, you Westboro people are bad, you're doing the wrong thing, which I think they are, but doing that didn't get through to them, right? And if anything, I think the way she put it in something I saw was that it just reinforced that they were right, that they were the righteous, and everybody else, the unwashed heathen, were, you know, attacking them, you know, and they were like standing in the city of God, so to speak. But one guy actually talking to them and or this woman anyway, and being nice, opened the door to them, to her seeing things differently and their things being worked out that way. So those are some examples I think of as pretty powerful, and with people that just about everybody in society regards as being like bad. So if it can work there, you know, it can work. It could certainly work on people who are not as bad or subscribe to not as bad ideologies, I'd say.
Yeah, I had an experience with a friend of mine. And like I said before, a lot of times it just takes a few questions that they've never considered. And so just a short background. This was, I think this was, Trump was in office. There was a big furor about children in cages around the border. And my friend, he was really upset about the families being separated. And I'm looking at it like, I've read reports and things like that a large percentage of the kids there are not, who are with adults, they're not family members. So they're being either different, their family is paying these people to bring them across, or what, something else, but they're not all, a large percentage of them were not family members. And so they're being separated, and the people are legitimately breaking the law when they're coming into the United States without the proper authorization. So my friend took it as if the Trump administration was being barbaric in separating these children and arresting the people, and as if the Trump administration were just going in with a lasso, just randomly just going and rounding up people. And so I just asked him, well, how did these people get there? Well, they're coming to the United States on their own volition. They're trying to come here on their own. It's not like we are going out there and sniping these people. Okay, he just looks at it from whatever the news is telling him to be mad about. Like, no, they're people coming here, on their own. They are breaking the law, and if someone were, and many of them are raped, by the way. Many of these the women and that come across are abused. Of course, I'd want people separated to figure out what's going on. You don't. You're breaking the law. If you break the law, you don't get to just stay with your family. Like there are certain laws that must be followed, and once you stop following the law, as we saw with a lot of these riots, a lot of the police stood down. Then you get a lot of other problems. When people are allowed to shoplift and take up to $950 of anything without any repercussion whatsoever, then the society quickly falls apart. I'm kind of getting off topic, but what
happened with that conversation with the guy, your friend?
He was like, he acted like, he's like, well, you do know, right? Like I was acting ignorant of what it was. I knew fully what was going on, but I asked an innocent question. Well, how did they get there? He's like, well, it's in the news. I'm like, I know, but like, have you thought this through? Have you logically thought from when they left wherever they were to where they are now? Like, that's what happens. People just see these things that on the news. They're just, here, you need to be outraged about this. You need to be outraged about that. And they don't know the whole story behind what's going on. And this is what was so evident with this Rittenhouse deal. The whole reason that there were riots was because mainly the news misportrayed something that happened. There was this Jacob Blake who was an abuser. He had a knife. He didn't drop it. The police shot him. And then the news said that police shot an unarmed black man. And then there were a bunch of other things going on. That's not necessarily there, but so things that weren't true were being portrayed as true, and vice versa. To me, it seemed like they were with the purpose of fanning flames, and so then you have riots that shouldn't be happening because of if the news accurately portrayed what was happening, and when we're honest about it, the people go, oh, okay, well, that guy had a knife and he was, he wouldn't drop it, and he was going for, it was on video. And then you have riots and police standing down, and then the Rittenhouse thing itself, which was on video, it appeared to be self-defense. Anyway, what I'm getting at is, once we understand and really do our research on a lot of things, a lot of these divisions and things fall away. And a lot of people are being quote unquote red pilled on this. They thought, with Rittenhouse specifically, they thought that he shot 3 black men. This was a big thing that people thought, that he shot 3 black men. Well, if they watch the trial, they go, oh, I didn't know that they were white. By the way, it shouldn't make a difference if they were black or white. If it's self-defense, it's self-defense, even if they were black or white. But anyway, I'm probably
the truth will set you free. But so what happened in that conversation with your friend? Where did that go? How did that happen?
Well, it just I don't know specifically with him. It wasn't more than like a 3 or 4, back and forth. Like,
oh,
I could go back and look at it. But I think I respect him, and I think he respects me because we went to high school together. He knows that I'm not a dummy. Let's put it that way. I may come across that way for a lot of people, but I generally like to think that I'm knowledgeable about some things. So he didn't just outright dismiss me.
Mhm.
But I've had several interactions with people that they're at least open-minded enough to engage in conversation with me. There was another one with, again, this was during Trump. There were these wildfires. This was probably 2 summers ago. And of course, the general consensus is the wildfires are caused by global warming, which it could be, but this was in California. And I said something along the lines of, well, I think a lot of it has to also do with bad forest management and cleaning up the forest and cleaning up the underbrush and all these things, and doing some preventative burns and things like that. And because Trump had once said something about sweeping the forest. Trump's very inarticulate. He says things that sound really dumb to a lot of people, but when you actually understand what he's trying to say, it's usually not so crazy. So he said something about sweeping the forest, which so this opened up the eyes of these people, because I said, well, what about some better forest management? And it's like they had never considered that was even a possibility, that managing the forest a little bit better and keeping, I was a Boy Scout. I was a Scoutmaster. When you're learning to build a fire, you build with kindling, and you build with little sticks and things like that. That's what you get the fire started with. And if you have,
You don't just take a lighter and a log and there it is. That's not how it works.
Yeah, you have to have things that start on fire very easily and quickly, and then that's what it takes it from there. And it was just kind of interesting that they had never really seriously considered that maybe the first line of defense isn't a carbon tax. It's like, well, let's chop down a few trees so it's not such a big worry. Let's remove some of the trees from the overhanging power lines that we know for sure caused at least one town in California to burn to the ground.
Yeah. Well, it's interesting. One thing that you point out there is that, to have some humility about what you hear, whether it's on the news media or something somebody tells you, that if somebody says, oh, actually it's not like that, be willing to listen. That's one element of goodwill. But also the thing with the kindling, the sort of the symbolism of it, you might apply it to goodwill. Like, how do you start a fire of goodwill that sweeps across the land? You don't just say, well, we're gonna just light up this whole town and then that's it. You have to start small with the smallest, some straw or dried leaves or something to get the fire going. And then it catches on the bigger stuff and the bigger stuff, and then you can get it moving. So, it's kind of like that poem Smile, where somebody smiles and then they do a good act and they do a good act and then eventually save somebody's life who became the president one day. It's like, well, just a little act of goodwill or kindness can snowball and lead to greater things. So with that, I think that'll wrap it up for us. Thanks for joining us and tuning in. And if you stayed this long, make sure to like, subscribe, hit that notification bell, and leave a comment if you're so inclined. Till next time, we'll see you later.
Bye, guys.